In this video, we'll begin to see how powerful the MARI brush engine is by learning how to customize a few brushes. Alright, so I have the rest of the model hidden. I'm working on just the cape at this point, and I have gone ahead and switched over in my layer stack. I've uncached the cloth detail group, and I'm using this painted detail layer here. So, MARI's brush engine is one that I've alluded to. It really kind of permeates several tools. We've seen it in both the paintbrush and the eraser tool, but as we move through this course, you're going to even see this brush engine pop up in several other tools. So, kind of the way this works, the central location for you, the artist, when it comes to really tailoring the functionality of a brush that you're using is called the brush editor palette, and it's right over here. If you don't have that open, you can right click up here and just simply choose brush editor. Should be the very first one. So there are a number of different options here, and let's just say that we're working on this particular cape and we're wanting to add a bit more dirt and kind of variation to it. So you can see if I turn that to flat lighting, kind of what I've painted so far, just not a tremendous amount, but we do have a little bit of that already in there. So jump back over to our full lighting, and right now I'm using the default brush. If I hold the K key on my keyboard to bring up the shelf pop-up, it's going to be this very first brush on the basic brushes tab. So in the brush editor, we have this little scratch pad down here, which is very, very useful. Again, I mentioned I'm using a Wacom Cintiq, so I'm painting with a stylus right now, and I can test a brush out right over here on the scratch pad, and you can see it is pressure sensitive. So that's a good point, and we should probably talk about that before we move any further into this video. Pressure sensitivity. If you're using a stylus, this is huge. So for any painter, 2D or 3D, pressure sensitivity is a must-have. MARI is an application that supports that, and you can see right over here in the brush editor under pressure. For any brush that we have currently selected, we do have 4 different categories that we can control with pressure. So colors right here, this basically is going to control how MARI will undulate between the background and foreground colors that we have selected. You can see right here that I have just simply black and white selected right now. But again, with the default brush, the current default settings for this brush are to have the radius adjusted according to pin pressure, as well as the alpha component here. So the radius, again, I mentioned if we hold down the R key, we can adjust the outer radius by dragging right and left. We can adjust the inner radius by dragging up and down. Both of those settings correlate here inside the brush editor, and I want to show you how to get there. So let me go ahead and just scroll down here a bit until we see the radius section. So watch what happens here for the inner radius and the radius. If I hold down the R key and adjust the radius is moving, and then up and down means the inner radius is going to move. And again, that controls how small the brush tip can get and how big it can get, just like you might expect. And these are hugely useful things. Now, we also have flow here, and flow is something else. It's very similar to alpha, but it controls the rate at which paint will emit from the actual paintbrush. So watch what happens if I disable alpha and turn on flow. So again, by pin pressure. So again, when you're using pressure sensitivity, these are the options you're going to want to go for. So again, this is a powerful, powerful brush engine, and we are just using the default brush, but we have a tremendous amount of parameters that are available to us. Just kind of looking at the top, if you're maybe a Photoshop user, things you may be accustomed to using are spacing. So we can adjust how close the alpha is spaced out along our stroke. We can adjust things like noise, how much noise there is inside of our stroke. Let me come over here and just use, there we go. There's some noise, and I'll reset that back to its default value. We can jitter the opacity. Jittering is randomization. So jitter opacity max and opacity. We can come in here. You'll see the word jitter in several places. That's essentially a randomization. So if we wanted to, we could come in here and let's see here. I'm going to come over here to position. It was hiding from me. We'll jitter the position and jitter position max. I'll increase that. And you can see we're starting to get a bit more of a noisy type of a brush. So again, we're still using the default brush, but we have basically created a custom version of it that's basically giving us a little bit of a interesting type of an effect. So let me just adjust my radius a bit. Let's maybe shrink that down. Starting to look kind of nice. Let's see what else we might be able to play with here and get this brush looking maybe even a little bit better. So if we come over here and align to stroke, that is going to align to the stroke, the brush tip. It's going to be a little hard to see with this particular brush tip shape because we're just working with a simple circle. We have how much the rotation can be jittered. We can come in and choose that. Again, something a little difficult to see with a round brush tip. And then we have the brush tip rotation. Again, difficult with a round brush. So now I'm going to just scroll down here and show you some other options. We can actually create our own brush tip simply by painting into the paint buffer. Maybe we wanted a brush tip, something like this shape. We'll just come in and erase a little bit of that away. Okay, that looks pretty good. We could actually save this as a custom brush tip simply by saying, I want to use my painting. When there's paint inside the paint buffer, Mari oftentimes refers to that as your painting. So we could use this Use Painting button. We could actually capture that alpha information and save it as an EXR file. I'm not going to do that right now. But again, there are several different options here available to you inside the brush editor. You'll also find there's a palette over here, and it's called the Tool Properties palette. If we open that guy up, you'll see here that there are actually several different parameters in here that are mirrored. You can see under Geometry, we can find things like vertical shear, horizontal shear. And this is where we can really start to kind of transform the look of the brush even further. So if we wanted to come in and kind of flatten things out a bit, we could start to shear them. And then we could come in here and jump back up here to some of those options I was mentioning were hard to see. We could do things like jittering the rotation. Now you can definitely see what that looks like. And let's see, we'll adjust the amount of rotation there. You can see my brush tip itself has even been transformed. So again, a lot of power and a lot of customization possible here inside of Mari's brush editor. Now again, this brush engine is present in the paintbrush. It's present in the eraser tool. So either of those tools that you utilize, you can quickly and easily come in here and really create some interesting custom brushes. Now, one thing I want to show you that just came to mind that I don't think I've shown you is Mari has the ability to quickly switch to a tool momentarily. So I've painted some paint into my paint buffer here, and I have my paintbrush selected. But and you know that we can switch to the eraser tool by just tapping the E key on our keyboard. But if I just press the E key and hold it, what happens is I momentarily switch over to the eraser, and I can come in and erase away some of that paint in the paint buffer as long as I'm holding down that E key. Once I'm done, I can release the E key, and Mari switches me back over to the paintbrush. So this is actually very similar to a feature inside of Photoshop, and it's actually something that I use quite a lot for selection purposes. So if I have my paintbrush selected, I can hold the S key and switch over to my selection tool momentarily, select what I want to select, and then release it, and then I'm back to my paintbrush. All right. Great. So in this video, we've learned about some of the power that can be found inside of Mari's brush engine. Go ahead and take a few minutes between videos and play with the brush editor and some of the parameters that you find there and see what kind of brushes you can create.